Alright Chieftains, welcome back to Strive for the 5 video series. This is part 3. We've reached the trilogy level. I'm super excited to complete our third installment here. Remember to watch these videos to help you prepare for assessments, and always refer to them throughout the year to help you get ready for the AP exam. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over your population calculations, which are always on the AP exam, so it's definitely a good idea to spend a little time to watch this video. Remember, you could take notes on this video and you could use the notes, alright, on your population calculation assessment. So what we're going to start with is calculating crude birth rate and crude death rate. It's very simple, right? The key thing to keep in mind about crude birth rate and crude death rate is that what you're calculating is the average or approximate number of births for every 1,000 people within a population. Right, so always remember 1,000 is a key number when you're talking about crude values within a population. So if we take a look at country X, right, you can make this whatever country you want to be. Let's say the total population is 10 million people. Within 1 year, okay, there is 250,000 births within this population of 10 million people. All right, and then within the same year, there was 150,000 deaths within the population. Okay, so you're going to do a really simple calculation, okay? So to calculate your CBR or CDR, right, crude birth rate, crude death rate, okay, all you do is you take the number of births or deaths and you divide it by the total population, and you take that number, which should come out as a small decimal, and you multiply it by 1,000. Right, and then when you multiply it by 1,000, ultimately all you're doing is you're moving your decimal places 3 places to the right, okay? You're going to see it's not that difficult of a calculation, and without a calculator, it's not that big of a deal, okay? So let's slide down this way, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to take 250,000 births, okay, within country X, and we're going to divide it by 10 million within the total population, okay? So to make this a little bit more manageable, because you don't have a calculator, first rule of thumb, right, eliminate those zeros, okay? So I have 4 zeros I can get within my top number here. What you do on the top, you should do within the bottom. And ultimately, right, you end up with 25 divided by 1,000, okay? Now you're saying, Mr. Decker, I hate doing division without a calculator, right? But you'll see that it's not that big of a deal. So the first thing you got to think of is like, hey, okay, this number is much bigger than this number. It doesn't work out in division. So what you should do is you should put a decimal here, and then put a decimal there up on top, right? Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a 0 here, okay? Now I'm thinking, how many times can 1,000 go into 250? You guessed it, it can't go. So then you put a 0 there, okay? Now I'm going to add another 0. How many times can 1,000 go into 2,500? Right, really easy. It can go 2 times, right? So then, right, 2 times 1,000 gives you 2,000. Right, remember all the way back to your younger years when you're in school, you got to subtract this when you're doing long division. Okay, and this gives you 500. Now again, Mr. Decker, 1,000 can't go into 500. You're right, but I could put a 0 here, I could carry it down, and then I could drop that 0 here, and now 1,000 could go into 5,000 5 times, okay? And when you're doing your long division rule, you end up with 0 and you stop, okay? And then because it's times 1,000, right, all you got to do is slide your decimal 3 places to the right, 1, 2, 3, and you end up with a crude value of 25 births for every 1,000 people. Now what I want you to do is I want you to stop the video. Okay, not yet, right, not yet, hold on. And I want you to calculate the population, the crude value, okay? Calculate the crude death rate for me. Right, so you're going to set it up the same way, okay, but now instead of using 250,000, you're going to use 150,000, right? So remember, no calculators, and then we'll come back and we'll see how you did. All right, Chieftains, welcome back. Let's see how you did with your crude death rate, right? You should set it up like this, right? It's the number of deaths, which was 150,000, divided by the total population, which was 10 million. After you eliminate your zeros, right, you end up with 1,000 divided by, or 15 divided by 1,000, right, excuse me, right, so your end of your setup, right, should look like this, okay, you have 1,000 on the outside of the box and 15 in the box, right, so ultimately that's too small, you got to put your decimal places there, add your zeros, and after you do your subtraction, right, you know, 1,000 is going to go into 1,500 once, 500, make it 5,000. It ultimately becomes 5 for a total of 0.015 times 1,000, okay, which ultimately gives you a crude death value of 15 deaths for every 1,000 people. All right, and ideally, right, you're always going to have numbers that are easy to manage without a calculator, all right? Now, once you're able to calculate your crude birth rate and your crude death rate, what I'm going to show you how to do is calculate your growth rate of a population. So, think about this. If your birth rate is higher than your death rate, is your population growing? Of course it is. If your death rate is higher than your birth rate, is your population growing? Of course not. In that case, you have a declining population just in terms of the birth rate and death rate. Always keep in mind that immigration or emigration, right, can also affect the total size of your population. All right, so we'll take a little break here, and then we'll come back and I'll show you the percent change or growth rate of a population. All right, so now that we calculated our crude birth rates and crude death rates, what we can calculate for a population of any given country is the growth rate and figure out whether it's increasing or declining. Okay, so your calculation is you calculated your crude birth rate, you calculated your crude death rate. All it is CBR minus CDR divided by 10. Keep in mind, this is a constant. You're always going to use 10 as your denominator, okay? So for the crude birth rate and crude death rate that we did, we have 25 minus 15 divided by 10, okay? So 25 minus 15 is 10, divided by 10. 10 can go into 10 one time, which gives you a growth rate of 1%. Something to always keep in mind is your growth rates are always typically going to be small percentages, such as 1%, 2%, or 3%. If you have a growth rate of about 13%, you probably did something wrong, and the correct answer is 1.3%. So let's take a look at another example down here, right, so you can see how this works again. Okay, suppose you did your calculations, right, and you had a crude birth rate of 30, and then you had a crude death rate of 10, right? 30 minus 10 is 20, divided by the constant of 10 is 2, right? Your growth rate is 2%. Now, something to keep in mind, very large populations grow rapidly even with a low growth rate. That's a theme I want you to keep in mind. So think about 2% growth if you have a population of 1 billion people, right? 2% of 1 billion people is going to produce a lot more people than, say, 7% of 100 million people, right? This is a concept that they like to trick you with in terms of the wording and the multiple choice examples, right? So now that we've done this easy part, what I can show you is something really cool, right, known as the rule of 70. And the rule of 70 is your doubling time, right? So if you have a growth rate of 2%, in how many years will that population double? Meaning, 10 million people becomes 20 million people, 20 million people becomes 40 million people, and 40 million people becomes 80 million people, right? It's powerful stuff. It's interesting to think about. In your lifetime, the human population is predicted to double, right? Right now we're about 7.4 billion people. That's going to double to 14.8 billion people. That's a lot of people. All right, so let's take a little pause, and then we'll come back and I'll show you doubling time. All right, guys, now, welcome to the rule of 70, right? This is always on the AP exam, okay? So it's really important you know this simple calculation, right? Because it's the rule of 70, what you're going to do is you're going to take 70, it's a constant, and divide it by your growth rate. So remember, in your other CBR, CDR, right, calculation, you had 2%. A really important thing to remember, which messes people up, is just keep it as 2%, right? Don't make it 0.02, right, as this form of 2% as a decimal. Okay, so all you do is you take 70, you divide it by 2. That gives you 35 years, right? Keep in mind now, this means your population will double in 35 years. So if your population is 10 million, in 35 years it becomes 20 million. In 70 years, that 20 million becomes 40 million, right? That's why this is a very powerful calculation. This is why this is a big financial calculation also. This is how people make a lot of money in the stock market, right? Or with mutual funds, investing money based on the interest rate of return, okay? So, if it's the year 2018, and it's 35 years, meaning the population will double in size by 2053, okay? So this is not when the global population will double, right? Because our growth rate is less than 2%, but it is still growing. So if we take a look at this example over here, okay? Let's say you did your, your growth rate, you did your CBR and CDR calculations, and you ended up with 1.5. Right? All you do is you take 70, because it's a rule, you divide it by 1.5. You don't have a calculator, so let me show you how to do this. It's really easy, right? I don't like dividing with decimals. 1.5 is tricky for me. So I make it 15, right? So what you do on the left, right, you end up having to do on the right and make it a 0, okay? So now I know 15 could go into 70 4 times, and that gives me 60. 70 minus 60 is 10. I have to drop a 0 because, right, 15 can't go into 10, right? I got to add one more 0. Now, 6 times 15 is 90, right? Again, right, I end up with 10 and I have to drop a 0. Ultimately, this will keep going on and on and on and on and on, but you can stop, right, once you pretty much get to a whole number. So when you finish your division, right, meaning at 1.5% growth rate, okay, the population will double in about 47 years or 46.6 years, right? Think of it. India is a growing population, okay? If their growth rate, okay, is 1.5%, which you think is low, okay? They're 1 billion people, meaning in 47 years, 1 billion becomes 2 billion people, and that's a lot of people. All right, so thanks a lot for watching this video. Remember to watch it again. Take notes. You could use your notes on the assessments, and always refer to these throughout the year to help you get ready for the AP exam. We have dimensional analysis, we have scientific notation, and now we have our population calculations. Thank you so much for watching.